A spin-off Half-Life episode set in Ravenholm featuring Adrian Shepard as the protagonist was deep into development at Arkane Studios before Valve cancelled it. The question is, why? Back when Valve announced Half-Life 2 Aftermath, now known as Episode 1, they actually contracted 4 different studios to make spin-off Half-Life episodes, those studios being Junction, Monolith, Gearbox, and EA Montreal. We know next to nothing about most of these games. We only know that none of them ever got to see the light of day, and that a Ravenholm game by Junction was cancelled. Valve then contracted Arkane Studios to make another game set in Ravenholm, likely due to the studio having already released a Source Engine game, which at this point was one of their only 2 releases. This time, the Ravenholm game was to be set after Gordon's visit. And thanks to a documentary and eventual gameplay showcase by NoClip, we know quite a bit about this game. In this video, we'll be taking a look at all the content made for this game in its about 1 year of development time, as well as the story of its cancellation and also the heartbroken team of developers it left behind. Story-wise, the game would have revolved around Grigori trying to invent a cure against the demon's neurotoxins, a vaccine with which he constantly injects himself with. He tells Adrian about wanting to enable a beacon to send out a message for all with eyes to see. What exactly this means is unclear. The player would have wandered around Ravenholm enabling power and likely helping in other aspects to get this message out there. While you probably know what Ravenholm looks like, this game would have brought quite a few new twists to it. The team put an effort to make the side of Ravenholm the player got placed in this game to be different architecturally. The first hour of this game is mostly spent in a hospital that would have been built in the 1960s, with the rest of the architecture that we got to see here being the regular 19th century European facades we know from Half-Life 2. The central windmill tower, which is meant to provide power to the beacon, was inspired by unused concept art for Half-Life 2 by the late Viktor Antonov, who's responsible for the looks of City 17 and all kinds of common architecture and machinery, as well as for the looks of the Dishonored games. May he rest in peace. It was also to be set at daytime, a time frame the player never got to see Ravenholm in. Despite taking place at day, the game undeniably had a horror element to it, not one that's new to Half-Life in any way, but it was really emphasized here, part of which comes from the biggest change, which is the types of enemies the player has to face. As mentioned, Grigori is trying to create a cure, and as comes with creating most medicine, there were test subjects. In this case, Grigori confirms that he tested it on monkeys, and possibly also on humans. More on that later. Outside of Jeff in Half-Life Alyx, a game that came out more than a decade after Ravenholm's development, these regular zombies would have been the first regular headcrab-less zombies in Half-Life, behaving mostly like those of Left 4 Dead. They were incredibly well animated, being able to react to any changes in the environment, getting up from being ragdolled, which is absolute magic in my eyes, and freeing themselves from bolts shot by the player. The zombies would have also featured a new spitter variant, which at the stage the game was left off at, seems to reuse the antlion worker's spit effect. The other enemy type were monkeys, zombie monkeys. These would have snuck around the player and attacked in large groups, dynamically using vents to flank the player using complex enemy AI. It may look like these are pre-planned animation sequences, but it's actually part of the advanced AI they developed for the monkeys, making this the first time you fight an enemy with brain cells in Half-Life. The monkeys' one weakness was their fear of lights. The flashlight was able to scare them away, but given their large quantities, they would have surrounded you to the point where the flashlight couldn't have saved you. Thankfully, of course, you were to get a handful of weapons, which we'll get to now. To list off the basics first, the pistol, SMG, and shotgun from Half-Life 2 all return with a new functionality. Alongside the other weapons I'm about to showcase, they all have the secondary ability of shoving, similar to the way it is in Left 4 Dead. Unlike Left 4 Dead, however, these are actually really strong and able to kill a lot of enemy types on their own. The first new weapon is the nail gun. This is basically this game's gravity gun in terms of its uniqueness and the amount of gameplay that revolves around it. Outside of using bolts as regular projectiles to shoot at enemies, you could also use it to conduct electricity. This was, for one, used in puzzles revolving around relaying electricity from one place to another, and it could also be used to set traps to take out enemies, including enabling the power of certain pre-built traps or making an electric tripwire. This weapon looks like an insane amount of fun, and for this weapon alone I am already so sad that this game never went on to release. There are also nail grenades. They would have conducted electricity through the explosion, attaching to the nails it propels. The next new weapon is referred to as the charge gun. It could charge using sources of electricity and fired balls of energy, which could be used to take out enemies or to transmit electricity. It's worth noting at this point that the player received a new meter to watch out for: absorption. It drained and also recharged quickly. It went down whenever the player came in contact with too much electricity and would cause the player to take damage if it went down to 0. This marks the last weapon we have footage of. Apparently, there was also another weapon that would have allowed the player to play with electricity, which likely refers to the cut magnet gun from the original prequel Ravenholm game by Junction Point. There was also supposed to be a leaf blower that the player could use to do double jumps, of which we have concept art. They really were gonna bring back Adrian Shepard to turn him into a gardener. While the documentary or gameplay never showcased this, there is concept art of multiple chainsaws and a shovel, which may mean that these were planned weapons, but this is purely speculative. There could just as well have been props laying around in the environment, or scrapped entirely very early into development. All in all, the player was to slowly be introduced to the mechanics of conducting electricity from one end to another, to charge machines and traps, making for most of what the gameplay revolved around. Combined with the advanced gore system for the zombies and AI that reacts to the player's moves in a way that is advanced even for today's standards. This in combination with the electricity puzzles makes for one of the most exciting pieces of Source Engine gameplay I've ever looked at personally. And to think that this is all just the first hour of this game. We don't get a bunch of story in this game. As stated, Grigori has created a sort of vaccine against what he describes as the demon's neurotoxins, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Zombies in Half-Life are zombies because they're headcrabbed, which means that these zombies were likely created by Grigori's experiments. But this would mean that he experimented on them to create an immunity against the creatures he created by experimenting on them. This doesn't make sense, meaning that this game implies that the headcrab-less zombies are a not-before-seen kind of infection, similar to the virus from Left 4 Dead. And if you wanna consider this game canon, perhaps Jeff of Half-Life Alyx got infected by this exact same virus, 5 years before Half-Life Ravenholm happened. It makes sense that Adrian Shepard doesn't catch it, given he has a gas mask and some pretty hefty armor on him, meaning he's all but immune to bites, scratches, or a potential airborne transmission. It is this virus that Grigori created a vaccine for. And while most normal zombies are not previous test subjects of his, the Spitters may be just that, failed experiments. While on the mission to enable the windmill to help Grigori shine the beacon, whatever that may mean, Grigori was very likely to slowly turn into a mutated zombie himself. The injections seem to not work. Concept art shows him covering up himself more and more. There's also an image of a fully mutated model of him. This would have likely been the final boss fight. For another fun fact, while they were likely never confirming it directly, during the development of this game they leaned into the idea that the windmill required a ton of car batteries to be powered, which they thought of to be taken from all the abandoned cars you see across Half-Life 2. Which is a really fun thing to think of as canon, that Grigori visited all places we see in Half-Life 2 to steal batteries. What exactly the beacon is, what the demon neurotoxin is, why Adrian is here, and what the potential yet to be thought of G-Man speech at the start of the game would have been, are all questions that we will likely never know the answer to. All thanks to a call Arkane got from Valve one day.
Do you have any insight from your side why you think they decided not to go ahead with it, especially considering how far along it was?
Yeah, I think that the team in France has never really accepted the end of Ravenholm, and I think they read too much into it. Frankly, I just think it was business.
Completely out of nowhere, Valve let Arkane know that Ravenholm was not gonna move forward, likely cancelling all of their episodic format games right then and there. Arkane developers went on to tell the story of how much of a shock this was. They went ahead and polished everything they had made thus far by working 24 hours for 2 weeks in hopes to convince Valve to give this game a chance. Hell, they even made a custom soundtrack, but as by Tyler McVicker's reporting, most Valve developers didn't even take a look at it. Valve simply didn't want to release anything Half-Life anymore, and cancelled this game for no good reason. As per Arkane's own reporting, Valve never told them why. Mark Laidlaw, writer of all Half-Life games up to Episode 2, stated the following in an interview with Lambda Generation in regards to this game. There was indeed a project called Return to Ravenholm. We are big fans of Arkane and wanted to come up with a project we could work on together. We threw ideas around. They built some cool stuff, but we eventually decided that it didn't make sense to pursue it at the time. As I recall, we felt like a lot of the staples of Ravenholm, headcrabs and zombies, were pretty much played out, and the fact it would have to take place sometime before the end of Episode 2, so as not to advance beyond where Valve had pushed the story, was a creative constraint that would hamper the project, and Arkane. And while this may certainly be interesting arguments, Arkane didn't seem to have a problem with the creative challenge of making a prequel, and neither with innovating on the idea of zombies and how you interact with them. In the 20th anniversary documentary of Half-Life 2, Gabe talks about being stumped with Half-Life, that he couldn't figure out why Episode 3 was pushing anything forward. The team seemingly didn't manage to innovate enough to create anything worthy of a new Half-Life, something the developers talk about with regret, adding that they totally could have made Episode 3 with 2 more years' time. It is likely that Ravenholm got cancelled for similar reasons. Valve wanted every Half-Life release to raise the bar, and a contracted spin-off could be speculated to have been a risk in their eyes. It could possibly bog down the reputation that Half-Life has. You may or may not agree, but this would have been a risk. One that I personally disagree with given what we can see in this 1-hour segment of gameplay alone. After years of new Valve content exclusively being adjusted the angle of the middle doors on Dust 2, Valve eventually would go on to create Half-Life Alyx, breaking the Half-Life crowd. Of course, VR is exactly the technological innovation they were looking for, but perhaps this is a step in the right direction, potentially, eventually, still allowing the release of Half-Life 2 Ravenholm. Ravenholm was and is to this day a passion project of Arkane. As it's told, new hires at Arkane get to sit down on an old computer and play their build of Ravenholm once. And lots of people on the team still talk about this project. Even though they have since released games like Dishonored, Prey and Deathloop, they likely still want to release this game, but probably can't without Valve's approval. Of course, the game is nowhere near finished. But even if Arkane doesn't want to or can't finish it, releasing it as is will leave the community to create great things with it. If the Half-Life community is one thing, it's insane, but also very creative. If they were to release it, I can only imagine that a bunch of teams would immediately swarm to it like ants so they can all make a finished version of it. Now let me be clear, I don't want anyone to contact anyone. Do not write emails or DMs to anyone at Valve, Arkane or wherever else. If you do, you suck, I hate you and nobody loves you, okay? What I would suggest though is that we as a community keep the idea of this game one day releasing alive, and maybe Valve will listen someday. So, that is everything you need to know about Arkane's Half-Life 2 Ravenholm, aka Half-Life Opposing Force 2 Ravenholm. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and join the Discord to be notified when I upload or stream. Huge shout out to NoClip, without them we wouldn't have most of this info and none of this footage. I linked the full 1-hour gameplay and the Arkane documentary in the description. And otherwise, thank you for watching.